Hello, and today we got ESPN commentator and the voice of FIFA, Derek Ray. Hiya, Derek. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, Angus. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Let's start off. What was your first job in the media?
First job in the media as a professional was at 19 as a commentator for BBC Scotland on the radio side. This is a long time ago. This is going back to 1986 when I got my first break. And as well as being a commentator, I did everything else. I learned how to be a producer, a presenter, how to cut tape, how to do most things that you would want to do in the broadcasting business, and got my first taste of television. So I was lucky to get that break at a very young age.
Can you remember your first match and what was the score?
First professional match was Kilmarnock against Dumbarton at Rugby Park in April of 1986. And I'd been given that chance because my great hero, David Francie, was out of action because of a knee injury. So they asked if I would take over the duties that David would normally have responsibility for. And yes, Kilmarnock won the game by 3-0. And it was a good game. There was a very good goal, I remember, from Ian Bryson in that match. And yeah, it'll stay with me forever, that one.
What's the best stadium you commentated in?
Well, I'll give you my favourite stadium. I've been lucky enough to broadcast from, I would say, probably all the great venues in world football. So, you could talk about the Bernabeu or the Camp Nou in Barcelona or Old Trafford or Anfield. But my favorite, and again, this is because I work in Germany a lot, and I've always said this is the place I would choose to do my last commentary, if ever I got to choose where to do my last commentary, and hopefully that's many years away. The Signal Iduna Park in Dortmund. And of course, locals don't really call it that. That's the official sponsor's name. They tend to call it the Westfalenstadion, which actually was the name of it when I first went there back in 1987. So yeah, Dortmund would get my vote.
With the famous yellow wall.
With the famous yellow wall, the Die Gelbe Wand, and the Südtribüne, as it's known, the South Terrace. And it is just a very special place. As I say, when I first went there, it wasn't quite as special because it pretty much looked like most other German venues. It was a bit more modern than the majority of others at that point. But of course, standing was what most people did, and that culture changed. In Germany, it's still the case that a large number of people who go to the local football stadium stand, and that is in the culture.
What is the best moment you commentated on?
That one I can answer pretty easily. The best moment would be, and again, circumstances here, because as a commentator, you have to be lucky enough to be given the task in the first place of commentating at a particular game. In the 2000s, I was lucky enough to be ESPN's voice of the UEFA Champions League around the world. So that meant going to every final. And in 2005, the final was in Istanbul, and it was AC Milan against Liverpool. And I went into that one thinking Milan would probably win. They were the class of Europe at the time. Liverpool were very much underdogs. It was a real surprise that they had made it to the final with a bit of a ragtag and bobtail team, you'd have to say. But Liverpool prevailed on penalties, having been 3-0 down in that final after 40-odd minutes. And I was looking at my notes, making sure I had in my head what the record margin of victory was in a major European final. Lo and behold, Liverpool produced the comeback of all comebacks. And so the moment, I would have to say, would be the moment when, right at the end of the penalty shootout, Jerzy Dudek foiled Andriy Shevchenko from the penalty spot, and Liverpool, against all odds, against all expectations, had become champions of Europe again. So I think that I'll be hard-pressed to ever get a game in a major final. I think anybody as a commentator would be hard-pressed to get a game like that in a major European final, certainly, ever again.
Is there a worst moment you commentated on for example, in a bad injury, a red card, that sort of thing?
Bad injury or a red card? Nothing is really coming to mind. I mean, there's nothing that really springs to mind about something that would have happened in a game like that. Maybe I've been lucky. There's nothing that stands out. I can think of many games that I've done down the years that just were a bit ridiculous, and maybe the standard wasn't so good, or maybe something silly happened in a game. I'll give you one that I think was a low point of my years covering Major League Soccer in the USA. And that was a game at Miami, a team called the Miami Fusion, who are now out of existence. But they played at this little stadium called Lockhart Stadium, and it was about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It was just far too hot, as it often was in Miami in the middle of summer. And this game went to what they called at that time a shootout, a 35-yard shootout. And you might have seen it. It was a feature of American soccer for a while. They didn't like drawn games, but the fans were sort of rebelling against the drawn games. And this game between the Miami Fusion and the New England Revolution went to one of these 35-yard shootouts. And it became so ridiculous, they hadn't even really thought through that this was a possibility. But the goalkeeper got sent off in the shootout for bringing a player down, for rushing out of his penalty area and hauling a player down. So it was the first time that had ever really happened. Nobody knew quite, what happens now, So a guy called Joe Max Moore, who actually went on to play in England for Everton, not the tallest fellow at all, but he decided to go into goal for the New England team who'd had their goalkeeper sent off, and proceeded to put on gloves which belonged to Walter Zenga, the first choice goalkeeper, which were about 10 sizes too big for him. And the whole thing was just a farce. And I think actually to this day, people would say that was the game that absolutely sealed the fate of the shootout. And it's funny, there's been a bit of revisionist history about that, because I see clips on social media almost glorifying the shootout and saying, well, we used to have this and it was great, and wouldn't it be wonderful if this replaced penalty shootouts? Again, it's being disingenuous, because they weren't in there to replace penalty shootouts. They were in there to settle drawn games, because people didn't like, or at least the organizers didn't like, drawn games. So it pretty much died a death after that, and a good thing too. So that's the one I would probably say as the low point, that game on a far too hot and humid evening in Miami, and the death knell for the much derided shootout in the USA.
A few years ago, you started doing commentary for FIFA 19 and FIFA 20. How did that come about, and what's the process of commentating on a virtual game?
Well, it came about through a simple request through a third party, and I had not long moved back from the UK to the USA. I was actually in Germany when I got this email. I work in Germany quite a lot as well. And essentially it said that there was interest in you from one of the big video game companies, and they would like to have a chat with you. It was no more than that at that point. And then it sort of evolved to the point where they said, okay, well, it is EA Sports, it is the big one, it is FIFA, and they've been monitoring you for a while, and they like your work. And I've been doing the Champions League a lot down the years, as I said, for ESPN mostly, around the world, USA and around the world, but also when I was in the UK on BT Sports. And they, as it turns out, were about to acquire rights to the Champions League and the Europa League. So they wanted a new commentary voice specifically for that. So that's how it started. And the only thing was, and I can tell you this now, I couldn't say it publicly at the time because contracts weren't signed and the whole deal for the Champions League wasn't in place. So it was a sort of okay, well, this will happen, but we just have to wait for the right time to announce it. So I had about 6 months where I had to keep it all to myself. Meanwhile, we had started recording some of the other features of the game. So I had to keep it very hush-hush as to what I was actually doing. So in terms of how we make the game, without going into too much detail, I think what people probably would be surprised about is that I'm not watching pictures when I'm commentating. So the idea is that it should sound organic. It should sound like I sound when I'm commentating on a game. So that means using phrases that I would normally use in a game. And, there are maybe only a certain number of ways you can use to sum up a particular situation. So when you get to the 10th or the 11th time of describing a header just over the top from a corner, then, your creative powers are being put to the test. And that's what I love about the job. It's very challenging in a good way, creatively coming up with words that do fit the situation. And I work with a brilliant production team and a great sound man who's been doing it for a long time. And all in all, it's more than 20 days in a studio per year. So it's a labor of love for me, and it's been great having this connection with new fans, I think, because as you say, I think a lot of the people who play FIFA are younger than me, let's just say. And so that has been wonderful to have that connection. And yeah, FIFA 19, FIFA 20, two highlights of my career. I've thoroughly enjoyed them, and yeah, delighted that a lot of people have maybe come to know my work a bit more through FIFA.
Just another thing, that are you with your co-commentator on the game at that time, or is it done remotely, all by yourself?
Well, it just depends on the situation. Most of the time, we are doing it remotely. We're doing it individually. There are times when we need to be together in order to coordinate certain aspects of it. But of course, technology is such now that, I mean, you and I are talking here from two very different locations. I'm on the East Coast of the USA as I talk to you here. So yeah, technology makes it all possible.
What was the last game you commentated on?
Well, the last game I commentated on, funnily enough, was in February, because I had decided I was going to be in Germany in February for a number of different dates. And I had about 7 games in 8 days. And then I was going to take a short break and then come back to it again in March. But of course, the pandemic rather got in the way of that. So the last game that I did from the stadium was in Munich at the Allianz Arena. And it was a pretty big one in Germany. It was Bayern against Leipzig, the two leading lights at the time, or at least along with Borussia Dortmund. But Leipzig had been leaders, remember, going into the winter break, coming out of the winter break.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a 0-0 draw, which doesn't sound like anything great, but it actually was a good 0-0 draw at the Allianz Arena on that Sunday. And I commentated with Jens Lehmann, the former Germany goalkeeper, former Arsenal goalkeeper. Many will know him as that. And yeah, little did I know at that point that I wasn't going to be broadcasting a game again for quite some time. And the way it goes on for me because of my location, because I live here in the Boston area in the USA, and I won't be traveling anytime soon.
Have you been doing commentaries remotely from your home, or was that the last one you did?
That's the last one I did, because the idea of doing remote commentary sounds in theory easy, but it is actually fraught with technical difficulties, and it demands a particularly high operational system in terms of making it all sync up, because the challenge is to get the words to match the pictures, and that applies both to the commentator at this end and also to what goes out on the air. And you know, I think we have been looking for solutions. I work a lot for the Bundesliga's World Feed, and we have internally discussed ways of making that happen potentially for next season. But I think the priority for what was left of this year was to make sure everything got on air in a way that would not lead to any mistakes or any technical problems. And so I've had to set this out. But hopefully next season it's something that we can look at.
Mm-hmm. Just finally to end on, when was the last time you had to pay for a ticket to go to a football match?
Oh, I can answer that one quite easily. The last time I had to pay for a ticket at a football match would have been February on my trip to Germany. And I make a point, when I go to Germany, I go to games up and down the divisions. I go to second division games, I go to fourth division games. So the last time I paid for a ticket was a home game of Viktoria Köln, who play in the fourth division in the Regionalliga West. That's one of the regional leagues, part of the fourth division setup. And yeah, I can say that I pay for my tickets a lot. In fact, that's really what I build my whole German trips around. I'll commentate on several games over a 2 or 3 week period, and then I'll look at the schedule, and wherever there's a game, I'll go to that game. And I'm not sitting in the posh seats anywhere. I'm usually if I'm not on the terracing, then I'm in the main stand. But I've paid my money, and that is all part of the fun of it.
That's great to hear. Right, so that wraps it up. It's been a pleasure having you on, Derek. Thank you.
The pleasure's all mine, Angus. Thanks very much, and good luck with your future endeavours.
Thank you.